My guest today is Dr. Laura Anderson. Anderson is a groundbreaking therapist and thought-provoking author who challenges the boundaries of faith and mental health. With over a decade of experience, Anderson navigates the intersections of faith, trauma, and emotional wellness. And she's also the founder of the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery, which helps individuals heal from religious trauma. In her acclaimed book, When Your Religion Hurts, Anderson confronts the psychological scars of religious trauma, offering transformative guidance for healing. Anderson's empowering therapeutic practice encourages her clients to reclaim their identities and build healthier relationships with themselves and their spirituality. Laura, why is American Christianity producing so many people who are experiencing religious trauma? What is going on in American Christianity that there are so many people seeking out experts like you? What's happening?
Oh, man, I could go in a million different directions with that question. You know, we're looking historically, psychologically, all that. But I'll start with
all of
the
that.
first thing that came to mind was, you know, I believe I introduced a term in my book called high control religion. And I don't have a succinct definition for it yet. I'm working on it, but I can tell you the components of it, sort of.
Please.
But ultimately, we're looking at a dynamic of power and control when we're within any sort of high control religion. And I think that when we look at the tenets of American evangelicalism today, fundamentalism, many different denominations just kind of baked into their doctrine, their theology, how they run different churches, we see a dynamic of power and control happening. And I think it would be worth noting, too, that in a patriarchal system, which not only is our society as a whole, but what so many churches view as the godly way to navigate things with very specific roles and orders of people on top and being able to consequence others and set the rules. When we are involved in systems like that, and then we have God over top of all of that, because God says, we are always then putting people at risk of being harmed. In part because the church is interested in protecting itself as an institution. Institutions aren't necessarily, well, I don't think ever, for people. You know, they are interested first in themselves and then maybe other people. And when that's the case, when we're built on this dynamic of power and control, and we are interested in like the self-servitude of the system, of the institution, we open up an environment for people to be harmed.
Yeah.
And whether that's, you know, through the doctrine and theology, whether it's through specific church practices, through specific people, clergy, other leaders, through movements like purity culture or different, you know, theological movements, we're opening up what can be now recognized as adverse religious experiences, all sorts of physical and mental health disorders, dis-ease, discomfort, all the way up to trauma, religious trauma.
Yeah. So, and I, when reading your book, that term, high control religion, was very helpful for me, even though you might be saying, okay, I'm still not going to pin it down. Just the phrase itself is helpful. Mm-hmm. So, Laura, what are, using your words, components? Obviously, we know people can be high controlling. We know people in certain roles, like a minister, a pastor, a spiritual overseer, can be high control. But can teachings, doctrine, what then can be some of these components that then a person experiences high control?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm going to shamelessly plug my book for a second, only
Please.
because there's this really great chart in the back of it. It's the appendix. And for people who are watching along, is this right here. It's what I call the religious power and control wheel.
And it's a wonderful book, by the way. It is a wonderful book. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to credit the work that's been done on domestic violence as an inspiration for how I came up with the religious power and control wheel. So many of the dynamics between high control religion and high control relationships or domestic violence or intimate partner violence are very much the same in terms of how they operate. And one of the things that we have as a tool inside of working with domestic violence victims is what is commonly known as the power and control wheel. And I loved that because we see this in relationships as well as in religion. You know, I list off these kind of categories: isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, threats, accusations, and intimidation, economic control, sexuality, and gender defining, and loss of autonomy. And these are very broad categories. We could add probably way more in here. But if you look at, we'll just take isolation because it's at the top. I put some examples of what that might be. Cutting off relationships with people outside of the system, information control, asking for reporting of where time or money was spent, increased level of commitment to the system's activities, devaluing people that are maybe not in the religious system, fear or propaganda regarding motives of people outside the system. And if you just look at that box, you might go, yeah, that's not that great, but it's also not the worst. Like, that's not abuse, is it? We have people that, try to get you to commit more time, energy, and resources to any group that you're a part of. Or we have people that are like, my way is the best way, and you shouldn't spend time with people. So does that mean I'm abusive or they're abusive? No, I'd say no, not necessarily. Because what's important with the dynamics of power and control is that they are subtle, and they seek to control more and more and more over time and kind of building on top of each other. So you might read some of this, or you might look at the power and control wheel that we use with domestic violence. You go, well, I've done that. I've minimized my behavior towards others. I've blamed others. Does that mean I'm an abusive person? No, I'd say not necessarily. But when we're stacking that on top of information control, you have to report back to me. When we're saying you're a sinner, you're worthless, there's nothing good about you. You're a woman, so you can only fit in this specific box. You must give the church at least 10% of your income. If you go outside of our system to receive counsel or support or legal action, there will be retribution for that. And when we start stacking these things on top of each other, that's where we get this foundation of power and control, because the other piece of it then is if you go outside of this system, if you decide to not do these things, there's usually pretty significant consequences.
Yeah, right.
And that could be anything in the church in terms of having to go through a repentance process, being brought up in front of the congregation, and maybe your sins are shared. Maybe you're shamed in front of people. Maybe you're put on a very rigorous path towards repentance. It could be all the way to excommunication, being disfellowshipped. And many times in that case, everything that is your identity and your stability is also removed. People are told they cannot speak to you. In some cases, you're losing your job, your income, you're having to move, you're having to change your entire life. And so when we look at it from that system, not only what is done, but what will happen if you do not abide by the rules and regulations of that system, that's where we start to see this dynamic of power and control.
Right. So exactly. So I want to hone in on a word you keep saying, which is the word system. Mm-hmm. So when certain dynamics that lead to power, that lead to control, and then they get systemized, right? Systemized within a community. So there's a social side to it. Systemized within a doctrine, a dogma, so there's an ideology to it. Mm-hmm. And then you drop in the God Almighty card, which then that gets existential. And when all of that is within a system, right, it becomes pretty potent to the vulnerability of a person's mental health. Yes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to be careful. I'm not somebody who preaches that religion is inherently harmful, will absolutely cause mental health issues, will absolutely result in trauma. There's a lot of other kind of physiological things that we can look at in terms of what are the results, how does that live in somebody's body. But it is worth noting that when we have systems like this, relationships like this, institutions like this, what the research is starting to come out with now and kind of verify these findings that we've known anecdotally, that when these are the tenets that are in place, the likelihood for it to result in physical and mental health issues or trauma is extremely high.
Sure.
And we know that too, just from all the research we have on other abuse and domestic violence and cult research, where we're going, hey, we're looking at some of the same dynamics here. Maybe it's not as extreme in certain ways, or it's more culturally acceptable in other ways, but that doesn't take away from the nature of it, what it does to a human's psyche, soul, body, the totality of who they are.
Yeah. So, Laura, it's 2024. There were these kind of systems, these fundamental systems in 1924.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, right. So what is happening? Like, why are we waking up to this? Is it the research? Yeah. Tell me, is it a 20th century's worth of what we think of dominant American Christianity that is adding up? What is happening that we are talking about this?
Yeah. I mean, when we think about just religious trauma in general, or high control religions, high control individuals that are in positions of leadership, this has been around since religion's been around, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
We think about even in the Bible, the Pharisees, right? And the ways that they were interacting with people and the rules, right? But when we look at like, how did we get here? There really is a collision, I think, of a few things. And that would be in the United States, the 2016 presidential election, which coincided with an explosion on social media for people to be able to hear other stories, to meet other people, and be able to start to talk to one another and say, hey, what we're seeing happening in our churches as a result of the political climate doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel connected to what I've always known. And I'm listening now to my spiritual leaders and pastors and clergy members and ministers speaking about this candidate that feels very opposite from the Jesus figure that I was taught about growing up, from the Jesus figure that maybe I gave up everything to follow, that I gave my life to. And all of a sudden, we're being told that this person, who is in so many ways being the opposite of who we've known Jesus to be, is now being the person celebrated. Now, we could go back into history the last 70 years to see, like, he didn't just pop on the scene and all of a sudden this started. I mean, we've got decades of research and historical context that we can look at to say, like, there was a reason that we got to 2016 and it had been in the works for a while. But what happened then is people started taking to social media and saying, here's where I'm disillusioned. Here are the things that have happened to me. Here are the ways that I've maybe even left this behind and said, I no longer believe this, but my body is still having these physiological responses and triggers to things that are being said, to my family members' responses. And for me, I kind of feel like I got into like immersion by fire. I wasn't on social media a lot, but I was very interested in this conversation because I'd already been seeing this in my office as a therapist. And I was during that time, I started my PhD program and wanted to create a resource for people, for clinicians, because I was like, I can't be the only therapist who is seeing this in their office. And all we were ever taught about religion is that it's a client's individual belief system. We don't really go there unless the client wants to. But religion in general is seen to be what's called a pro-social or supportive factor. And certainly it can be, but it was never considered, with the exception of very extreme cases like clergy sexual abuse. It was never considered something that might be harmful. It was never something that therapists were ever taught, like, hey, check to see, is this person in a dynamic of power and control within the religious system that they're a part of? And is that contributing maybe to some of their mental health issues? And so I started to notice this. I went online. I said, hey, what do you want your therapist to know? I thought I'd get like a few answers, and hundreds came in. And so when people found out I was a therapist, I had specialties in trauma, understanding dynamics of power and control, had come out of this system myself, understood kind of not only the cognitive deconstruction process, but the physiological healing process, that's where I got to have a bit more of a platform to start speaking. And then, here we are, 8 years later. But I do think that it cannot be overstated how much the political climate played into where we are at now 8 years later of people talking about this.
Yeah. And, you articulate that in the book so well.
I think it's worth noting kind of one thing here is when we talk about trauma, we're not necessarily talking about the thing that happened to you, but we're talking about the way that our bodies, our nervous systems respond to what happened to us. So I would say trauma is anything that's too much, too fast, too soon, or happens for too long, that overwhelms our ability to cope and come back to a place of safety. And that can also include not getting the support that we should have gotten in those big, scary, overwhelming moments. So when we're looking at something like the 2016 election or even the 2020 election or many other things, I would say those are things, right? They are instances, they are experiences that have happened. Just as sitting in youth group, hearing about the rose with no petals as a, symbol for purity and, having sex before marriage. Like, these are experiences where there was a lot of messaging. There was oftentimes a lot of persistent and inconsistent, maybe overwhelm and things like that. And how our body responded in those moments may or may not result in trauma or a variety of other things. And the same then is true with the election cycle. So it could just be that the overwhelm that we experienced was so much as a result of everything maybe we'd gone through before that perhaps that's where we saw the trauma really start to rear its head. Or it may be that we've, for many people, I mean, I had been out of that system for years already, and I'd been working through my own religious trauma and doing my own therapy, but then all of a sudden that's triggered again. Because now I'm hearing these messages, whether it's from leaders or I'm hearing it come up in the policies. I'm hearing it, taking it all the way, say, to this election when we talk about like Project 2025. There are so many people that I know and that I work with as clients and as colleagues who are deeply triggered because they're going, that's what I was taught in church. That's what I escaped from. And now they're trying to make it policy in the country, like day one, if Trump and Vance win, right? And so they go, that's deeply triggering. And perhaps it could be re-traumatizing. But for most people, just physiologically speaking, I would say it's a constant, trigger for them.
Yeah. And I think, using the election as an illustration is important. That said, your story is certainly a part and before a presidential election. My own religious trauma certainly happened apart from any tethering to politics. It came within the church system itself. Yeah. So, Laura, I love how you said the trauma is the response to it. That's why it's so personal. What might have, in a sense, happened circumstantially to one person does not create trauma, but then that same thing happened to another person and does create trauma, right? Yeah. This is why it's so important to be empathetic to people.
Right.
But, so a person who has experienced specifically religious trauma, what are they experiencing? Yeah,
so it sounds really kind of quippy, but I always say religious trauma is trauma. And it's important to say that because it means then we have access to all this research and resources and, therapeutic tools and skills and intervention. We don't have to go back and recreate the wheel. And so I would say when we use that definition, religious or trauma is anything that's too much, too fast, too soon, or for too long that overwhelms our ability to cope. Religious trauma would be that, but in religious context. So it might be doctrine that is too much, it's overwhelming, or it's constant, or for too long, right? Where it's inescapable. It could be experiences with certain people. It could be the living out of belief systems where we are having to suppress ourselves, whether that's the totality of who we are or fragmenting ourselves and parts of ourselves are not accepted. And we look at that in a religious, within a religious context, meaning whether it's the beliefs, the relationships, the doctrines, the practices, the rules, essentially, and how that lives in our body and what we do with that. And so it is subjective in the sense that what is traumatic for you may or may not be for me. And there's a variety of things that might occur in one's system, in bodily system, that can lead to that result or not. But I think I think when I look clinically at like the definitions of PTSD or CPTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder or, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, I really believe that religious trauma fits under that umbrella of CPTSD. And what's different, and I don't like to, some therapists will use like big T trauma, little t trauma. To me, that feels very comparative, and people are like, it's just a little t trauma, not that big of a deal. And so I like to use the term single incident trauma and complex trauma. And so a single incident trauma, which is most closely associated with PTSD, would be a specific thing or things that happen where you go, here was this event that happened. There was a before, and then the event happened, and then there was an after. And so when we work with trauma, resolving trauma in that instance, we can go back into that experience and resolve whatever the body is holding on to and move forward from that point. But with complex trauma, there isn't often a beginning and an end. For many people, especially growing up in high control religion, that's all you've ever known. It was consistent and persistent and inescapable, right? I think about how, as a kid sitting, in a church or around the dinner table, I'm being told, I'm unworthy. I'm a sinner. I'm going to spend eternity in hell, disconnected from all of my friends and family. And I'm 6. How does a 6-year-old conceptualize that? Not only the message, but the fact that it's coming from the people that they trust and love the most, the people that are supposed to take care of them. And so that child then is usually in a heightened sense of awareness or overwhelm or anxiety or fear. And that doesn't go away necessarily because the teachings just build on top of that. They're not able to escape it. They're not able to push back and say, no, I don't believe that. Because in many families, questioning is not allowed. You just take what you are being taught at face value. That's not everybody, but in many cases, it can be. And so we look at that, it's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Where it's these little things that are happening over time that equate to real harm that's, experienced in the body on the long term.
Yeah, so totally. Because as I read your story and as I pondered my story, as I read your story, assuming you talk to tons of people who have also experienced this kind of story, right, Laura, that trauma can be happening to a person and you don't even know it's happening. Mm-hmm. This high control is happening and you don't even know it. So, how do we know when we're in something high control? What is this awakening or waking up, this awareness? Because I can look back and go, damn, why didn't I see that? And I can experience shame to my intellect. Like, I'm a smart dude. I'm a smart person. And then, so what is being controlled when someone's experiencing that? what is being controlled? Is it agency? Is it eternal outcome? Is it fear, anxiety? What are some ping, ping, ping red lights people can be so they're more aware of what's happening to them?
Yeah, and it's all of that, right? And when we look at dynamics of power and control, whether that's in a relationship, like an individualized relationship, or a religion, a system, in a family, what we look at is the person who's on the receiving end of that abuse, let's just call it what it is, these dynamics of power and control. It's like their individuality, their autonomy, their agency, their voice is taken away slowly, and often without the other person even knowing it. You know, I like using the examples of domestic violence in the sense that people are able to go, oh, that makes sense, and then I can go back to my church experience or my religious experience, and I can see that. But you think about, you know, if you go on a first date with somebody to a restaurant and they speak really terribly to the server, and they flip the table over, and they cuss people out, and they punch holes in walls, and, you know, are just really, truly awful and abusive, right? You're probably not going on a second date with that person in I would say all cases, but, you know, we'll leave room for a little margin of error there. You know, 99.99% of the cases, you're not going on a second date, because that is very clearly red flag behavior. And I don't want to be around that. But when we are looking at abuse that happens in relationships, it's almost never like that. It doesn't start that way. And in fact, it starts in a way that's very loving, like overwhelmed with love and connection. Sometimes we use the term love bombing, right? Where that person is endearing themselves to you. They're making promises about the future. They are, you know, basically checking off all the boxes that you ever thought you had. Oh my gosh, this is the person, this is the group, this is the place that I've been looking for. And they're meeting these very inherent needs for connection and relationship that all of us as humans have. And it's over time that then that person, or maybe even multiple people in a system, will start to, crack a little bit. And in a relationship, it might look like they give you a really nasty look, or they make just a little bit of a remark like, oh, you're such an idiot. I can't believe you did that. And then they wait to see, how does that person respond to what I just did? Does that person go, yeah, I am an idiot. I can't believe I did that. You know, stupid, silly me, whatever. Or maybe they brush it off, or they ignore it. Or does that person confront them and say like, yeah, that was a mistake, but I'm not an idiot. Do not call me that, right? And that person is starting to kind of test the line to see, what am I going to be allowed to do? And then they slowly start pushing it out and pushing it out and pushing it out, until they are able to start doing and acting in ways where either they're not going to get pushback from a person, or they're going to be able to craft the narrative. So if somebody says, well, you said this thing to me, they'll say, yeah, but you made me do it. You've been nagging all day. Or I didn't say it like that. I didn't do it. And they're slowly grating away at that person's ability to see reality. It's gaslighting at its finest, where they are intentionally manipulating that person to fit this narrative where they are the ones in control and the other person isn't. And when that happens, a person's voice is starting to be taken away. They question themselves. Oh, maybe I didn't see it like that. Maybe that didn't happen that way. Maybe I am nagging. Maybe I am sinning. Maybe I am, this unworthy person, like I've been told. And so they start to then question themselves and believe that they can't trust themselves. And only this external source or sources is the one that can really craft and create and tell them what reality is. And so when that happens, it happens in all areas of life. It doesn't just happen, stay in this one lane. It starts to creep into all these other areas before you become essentially a shell of yourself in a relationship like that, where that person's voice is actually the voice that's in your head, right? They're the ones that are, if you kind of crack open your brain, you're like, what's that tape that's playing? It's that person's voice. They're not even having to do or say anything. You're just essentially introjecting those messages so that you believe they're coming from within you. So your narrative then is, I am unworthy, I am stupid, I wouldn't be anything without this person, right? And then they have power to get away with, to do and say things that they didn't at the beginning of the relationship. And when we look at that, whether that's with a person, or we oftentimes have these experiences inside of families or religion, other systems, institutions, leaving then isn't something that's often thought about, because your self-esteem and view of yourself is so low that you're truly believing, I cannot survive without this person. I cannot survive without this system, right? They've been telling me that I'm nothing without them, and I truly believe that. So if I were to leave, I don't know how I would survive outside of this, right? And when we look at that in a religious system, we've got messaging. I know I grew up with, Reformed theology, where I believed that from the moment that I took my first breath, I was a sinner, even as a tiny little infant, right? I believed that there was no good in me. I believed that I could not trust myself. And that especially as a woman, I had to have a man or men that were overseeing my actions and my path in life. So to leave that, I literally didn't know how was I going to survive in this world that not only was I being controlled here, but then I was being told that the outside world was out to get me. So it was a very dangerous place.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And so we look at all of that combined and we go, well, that's why people don't leave. And that's why leaving is so brave, right?
Yeah, right. Yes. And obviously, Laura, within a faith system, there are malevolent people. There is the the priest who is grooming the young boys and using all kind of gaslighting, manipulation role. There's the youth pastor, with a young student in their group. There is the ministry council situation where there's just gaslighting, grooming. We get that. I mean, it's awful. It's too much. My point is, from a mental health now, at least in 2024, we get the malevolence of that. We get how awful bad that is. So I'm not dismissing that. There's true victims of that. But a religious belief system, like setting sexual abuse aside, not from a healing or therapeutic way, no setting it aside, but I'm saying trying to hone in how religious trauma still can happen apart from what we think of predatory sexual abuse. And if I could just be when I converted to evangelical Christianity when I was 18 years old. I was raised in upstate New York in a very Italian Catholic family, which was nominally religious. My dad was atheist or agnostic, and my mom was the Italian Catholic schoolgirl. But it wasn't an approach like a doctrinal approach like evangelicalism. When my parents divorced, when I was a senior in high school, I started going to a cool church with young people, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
And it wasn't highly what you think of fundamental. It was evangelical, American evangelicalism. And all of my evangelical compatriots, they don't like anymore when I talk about my conversion happened psychologically. Like I don't give a spiritual, God got a hold of me and then opened up my I don't.
Yeah.
I go. I was ripe and raw for a religious conversion that offered love, acceptance, community, and certainty, I was just
Yes.
raw for it. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be too verbose here. So I convert to that. Then I go to college and I get very involved with Campus Crusade, now called Crew.
Yes,
Yes.
Crew.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, my conversion, at least psychologically, somatically, mindfully, existentially, it was meaningful to me.
Of course.
It was meaningful. I was a sincere young guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went full blown and I believed what my mentors told me.
Yeah.
The Bible is God's word. You're now going to heaven. You've escaped from hell.
Mm-hmm.
And you now have been given the keys to eternity. Mm-hmm. And sort of like, what's the greatest thing that ever happened to you? Jesus saved me. So then what's the greatest thing you can do for someone else in the world?
Right.
So, and then I became very good at it. But here's my point. So as I'm going through college and dating and exciting, then I start getting discipled. I got to meet with a staff member every week that's asking me if I'm kissing my girlfriend too much, if I'm touching my girlfriend too much, and am I living a righteous life in my thoughts, in my actions, and again, not just sexually, but characterly, but it all includes. Mm-hmm. Now, here's when I look back. I look back and go, the trauma was taking place then. Mm-hmm. I don't think my mentors were gaslighting me, being malevolent. Mm-hmm. They believed it.
Right.
But here's where I want to make sure I stay humble, but then I know this is a long wind-up, Laura. So then when I graduate from college, I go on staff with Campus Crusade, with Crew.
Right. Yeah.
And I do all the same things that were done to me. I pull aside young guys, I disciple them, I ask them if they're kissing too much, touching too much, rolling around too much.
Yes. And
you better save yourself for marriage, which obviously meant any kind of premarital sex, even heavy petting, anything that would ignite the mind was wrong.
Yes.
I look back on all of that with so much shame because I know I was creating trauma for people. I did that to people, but I didn't do it out of malevolence or this is where I'm separating the predator, the groomer. We know that's scary stuff. I'm just talking the youth group leader, the kid that's the young couple, the young married couple that comes to the therapist for premarital counseling, all of these kinds of things. So so how do we, religious trauma, so what is, the beliefs are creating trauma, dogmatic theology. This is all high control, right? The person can be sincere in what they're doing, believing I believed, once I was a staff member, I believed I was doing what God wanted me to do, which was hold these young men accountable and be a good mentor to them. All the while I'm sticking my business where it doesn't belong, right? I'm too involved in someone's private life.
Right.
And I'm involved in it now with a belief system that is creating an authority over them that is robbing them of their self-agency, right? Is this... So, yeah.
No, I have much empathy. I have a very similar story. Like my own story is very similar in that way. And I know many other people who have very similar stories because it sounds like we grew up in a very similar time. I'm sure you're familiar with Joshua Harris, as he went by back then, who wrote I Kiss Dating Goodbye and was like the poster child for purity culture. And of course, as many people in that world know, 6, 7, 8 years ago, he comes out of that. And he says, I'm deconstructing my faith. I'm healing from religious trauma. I'm recognizing what I was a part of. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he felt the heaviness and the grief of going, I understand that I grew up in this, and then I perpetuated it. And I have now hurt, on a grand scale, many, many people, right? And he's, maybe one of the most well-known for that. But yet I'm like, I did my own damage to people. You're saying, yeah, I did that to people too. It's just that he had a bigger platform. And it's this unique grief and grace that has to be held, together, I think, of going, I don't have to ignore my story of knowing that I was harmed by this. And I don't have to gloss over the fact that I hurt other people. I hold them both together. I think that there's so many people that are coming out of these systems that were so committed, like you're talking about. Like, you didn't meet with those guys to have power and control over them. It wasn't like, let me see if I can pull these strings and be the puppet master, right?
Yeah, no.
It was coming from this place of going, I truly believe this. And as I'm asking you these questions and holding you accountable, it's because I think that is love. I think that this is what God wants. And I'm probably putting myself under somebody else. So they're doing that the same thing to me. And so I think it's important to recognize that it's very complex. A lot of people want to say it's right or wrong. All pastors are, these malicious, narcissistic people. And while I do believe that high control religion is a perfect breeding ground for narcissistic behaviors and people and having power over others, there are so many of us that followed that, not only because it's what was done to us, but because we believed every single piece of it and thought it was the right thing. And so it's this process then of saying, how do I do my own healing? And then where do I make amends where necessary, right? I may not ever be able to go back to all of the girls that I mentored, or you may not be able to go back to the guys you mentored. But I have had many come and talk to me. And it's my job then to hold that space for them, and not to center or put my story above it. Well, I was just doing to you what you were doing to me. No, it's saying, I'm so sorry. You're right. I did hurt you. Yeah. And I regret that. I wish that never would have happened. And I'm so sorry. And that doesn't fix everything, but it's a little something, right, that we can do to repair the things that have been broken.
That's right. And we can also then, we can't fix everything, but we can move beyond and then be different.
Right.
From that point of view, as well as then not only reflect on how we would do things differently. Once we own it, we can then, how we undo it is make sure it doesn't happen in the future. And so you're a therapist. I'm still a minister. So even with all of my deconstruction, I somehow stuck with it. And by the way, I don't say that it is some sort of righteous bearing. If someone can't stick with it anymore, and they're more mindfully, somatically, mentally, soulfully, spiritually healthy, then my gosh, do what you need to heal. But I what I am trying to undo, Laura, is doctrines, beliefs, theologies that create this high control that you are talking about, that just do deep hurt and damage to people.
Yeah. I think that, this is just like, it's almost like a philosophical discussion, but it's, anytime that we are part of these systems that require us to change in such a way where we have to suppress ourselves, fragment ourselves, cut parts of ourselves off in order to be accepted by the group or to get the reward that is being promised, there's the likelihood that is or is becoming or already, like there as like a high control group is pretty high. And so when we're coming out of that, for you as a minister, for me as a therapist, as a coach, as somebody in this space, like one of the healthiest things I think we can do is like create the space for people to show up as themselves and to say, all of you is accepted in this space. And you don't have to cut off parts of yourself to be accepted or to be loved. Now, that's not to say we have to agree on everything or that we can't have our own thoughts and opinions, that are different. And maybe that means that we aren't super close in a relationship, or maybe it means that we kind of run in different circles, or in some cases, we don't have a relationship with that person at all. But that actually is okay. Like we don't have to be in relationship with everybody, right? And so if my goal is not to get you to morph into the value system and the beliefs and the personhood that I think is the best, I think that's a gift then that we can offer to other people in whatever space that we're in.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask you a question. As a therapist, it's a theological question, but I know you're not a theologian or attempting to be one. Theology is where I that's the lane I go in, and then I go to a therapist.
Sure.
Therapy is. It's been healing and helpful for me. I wouldn't have made it through otherwise. Yeah. But here's my question, my theological question to a therapist. Laura, can you have a religion that then says our scriptures are the Word of God? It's fallen from heaven, and we have the actual words of God. And though we are fallible, it is not. And we need to take our fallible lives and follow these scriptures that lead us into a righteous life. And if we don't follow these, we're not being righteous. And all the accoutrements of what evangelicalism is. So I don't have a full church statement of faith here, but you and I were talking about a church before we went on air that we both know about, and I won't, if we took your classic evangelicals statement of faith, can you have that and have it not create religious trauma?
Do you know who Frank Schaeffer is?
The son, Frankie Schaeffer?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, he asked me the same question.
Yeah.
I'm just like, this is a hard one because I think my answer is no, and I don't like that. But I don't think it's no because you couldn't follow God. I think it's no because Scripture is man-made and interpreted by people across different cultures and different generations and different, ideas of what was happening. And I think any time that you require somebody to follow this to a T in order to be considered good, you are running the risk of control, whether it's a little bit or a lot, right? Because you're implementing hierarchy then. You're implementing, patriarchal standards. And you're saying, I know something for you that's like better for you than you know what's for yourself. Like that's not a great position to be in. I mean, obviously I realize there's certain things like parents and children, of little kids, right? Yeah, the parent looks out for the kid because they do know better. But when we're talking about, especially like adult to adult, but even with parent-child, I think we have to be careful there.
Yeah, and no, I appreciate the risk that you're making. And, to reverse the question, the therapist asking the minister the same question, my answer is similar. And I'm going to assume something about you.
Mm-hmm.
That you and I have read enough academic papers about the science and the psychology of religion and spirituality that we would also agree that somebody can have a healthy well-being while having a religious and spiritual life. We've read plenty of academic studies. We've seen images of wonderful things that light up in the brain when things are activated in a spiritual way. That's still different than when you have doctrines and theologies that are high control, which is you're robbing someone of their self-agency. You're creating what I'll call salvation, or others call salvation anxiety.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? There's a man in a white hat, and there's a man in a black hat, and there's a damsel humanity strapped to a train track. And you're either going to live with the man with the white hat or live with the man with the black hat, depending on who gets to you first. And having to make this, and I do think, this is why I think Christian spirituality, this is why, apart from the psychological aspect, this is why this whole deconstruction movement, and now even moving beyond that to a more meta-modern expression of Christianity, this is why it's shifting, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting, too, that Christianity is really the only religion that feels the need to evangelize and to try to get other people to join in very overt ways. When we look at other religions, that's not a part of their model of religion. What they do is they live out of the beliefs that they have. And of course, if other people ask them, they will share. But they're not going on missions trips to say, hey, you're lost. You need what I have. So I'm going to essentially force my beliefs upon you. And that's kind of any time that we're doing that, whether it's with doctrine or, I don't know, a group of people coming to a new land, and forcing out the inhabitants and saying our way of life is better. We are better, right? Like colonization, like that's a really dangerous territory. And that, I think, can be separated from God or spirit or higher power, love, energy, whatever it is, something bigger than us. I think in so many ways, those can be two different conversations.
Laura, let me talk to you specifically of how this, let me talk a little more about sexuality, where our sexuality can become this wonderful coming of age, all the way to bring deep meaning in our lives or not.
Sure.
And how religion can, and high control religion plays a role in that. So you mentioned the purity culture and the purity movement of the 90s. And let's be honest, it existed before that.
Oh, yeah.
It continues. You and I can go to youth groups within a rock's throw from where we both are.
Absolutely.
It continues. So hold on to that, and then let me take religion out of sex, and then I'm talking to a therapist where sexuality can be wonderful and or vulnerable.
Right.
What do you tell people who are everything from in the self-discovery and expression of healthy sexuality, the healthy discovery and the journey of orientation, sexual orientation, and everything in between. If one no longer has a religion to then give morality to it, and that's where a lot of it all got screwed up. Someone moralized our sexuality through religious doctrine. So if now we set aside religious doctrine in knowing that people still can be hurt in their sexual identity, orientation, or discover its wonderful health, what is a healthy psychological approach to people's sexual discovery and journey once we remove religious dogmatic moralism?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll start talking, and if you
your face is going, I'm not. Yeah.
No, I'm thinking of like a million different directions to go, but I think that this isn't just in the church. This is culturally, we have such a tiny view of sexuality. What is sex and sexuality? I would say our sexuality is absolutely inherent to who we are and impacts every area of our lives. And when I say sexuality, I'm not just talking about who you have a sexual relationship with or experience sexual activities with. I'm talking about life force, passion, what brings life into this world, what drives political movements and legislation and relationships and social justice and all of these things, right? It's so much bigger than just whose genitals are touching whose, right? Like that's just like a teeny tiny bit of what sexuality is. And so my first line of thought is we got to expand what this is, because when you are told that sex is for these specific contexts, only it's a cisgender heterosexual man and a cisgender heterosexual woman who have both said I do and signed the legal paperwork, and then now it's okay, right? Like when that is all it is, or all it's allowed to be, you're cutting off so many areas of your life, right? And so I really believe that we need to start expanding what sexuality even is, and almost like go back through the developmental process of curiosity and discovery of self and how I interact with the world as a sexual self, as a sexual being. And yeah, we'll get to the sexual activity stuff, but there's so much more before that as well, including that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I won't go too much into my story, but my conversion happened when I was 18, but I had a high school sweetheart. I didn't experience sexual guilt until I got around born-again evangelical Christians teaching me the, purity culture. And then in high school, nor was I a philanderer or an abuser or a womanizer. I had a girlfriend, and all of my memories of that were innocent and wonderful coming of age. And then I got purity culture, which then gave all that thing. But that said, let's go back to me when I was, because there's some 14-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old that is still vulnerable to sexual hurt. So and then there's parents out there that are like, I'm raising my 14, 16, 17-year-old, and I don't want to use religion as a bumper, because maybe they got, like me, they go, I got that sexual purity crap. I'm not going there with my kids. So how do we... So I love it's got to be beyond that, but then there is the engagement with activity or the discovery of activity. So how do we help navigate young people so they don't do a further damage even apart from religion.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts from a therapeutic way?
Yeah, I know I use this example a bit in the book, but I look at, so the way that purity culture and religion often views sexuality is this light switch that you keep off until you turn on at that magic day, right? Where you say, I do to this one person. And then you're this sexual being who can engage in all these things, right? So if we're looking at it from a more expansive view, I would say let's look at sexuality as a dimmer switch where we are slowly turning things on. And if we look at, hey, we are a sexual being from the moment we take our first breath until our last breath, it means that there's parts of us that are engaged with at every developmental stage. And so you think about like little kids, right, that are exploring their bodies. There's curiosity, and then they're exploring other people's bodies. That's, very innocent, right? And as we age and develop, the sexuality light gets a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter and a little bit brighter as we are teaching kids how to interact with themselves and with other people, not in a shaming way, but in a curiosity way, in a learning way, in a, I would say like in a healthy modesty way, right? Like, okay, so this isn't something we would do in public, but we could do this in the privacy of your own bedroom, right? And so teaching those sorts of things without that added layer of shame. And so that by the time that, your adolescence comes and you've got hormones flooding your body, it's like sexuality, your body is not a foreign object to you. And there's an openness of discussion and dialogue that can happen between you and a caregiver saying, what is happening here, right? And help me navigate this, right? I've got questions. I don't know what's happening inside of me, right? And then maybe you start interacting with other people your own age in a more romantic way, right? But that's also this natural progression that you're already in contact with your body. You already know a little bit about what's happening, and there is a level of curiosity and even innocence in that as well, because we're figuring this out. But your body is able to essentially prepare for that. It's developmentally then ready for those experiences to happen. And what we see when it's the other way with purity culture, or even in cases of sexual abuse, it's that off-on. We are not developmentally ready. If we've been shut off our entire life, we have no developmental readiness to then be turned on. Our bodies actually can experience that as a threat, as abuse, and really can result in trauma. And there's a lot of research that's backing that up now. It's the same thing that happens with childhood sexual abuse survivors, where they are engaging or, being made to engage in activities that their body is not ready for, whether that's physiologically or psychologically, right? So it's an off to an on switch at a very inappropriate time because they're not developmentally there. Yeah. And so when we're talking about like, what does this look like? Part of it for the parents, especially if you've grown up in it, is we might have to go back and go through some of those developmental stages yourself, right? With some basic embodiment stuff, with some curiosity, relearning, or maybe learning for the first time, things about yourself and how you are interacting with your body, with other people, all of that. And letting yourself kind of start to go through that process that you didn't get to go through back then, and taking your kid with you too, like being able to let them have that as well. And maybe you're like, oh my gosh, so my kid is, 15, like, have I already missed the boat? No, you haven't. We can go back and start opening up those conversations and talking about it and integrating that into family life. Not in an inappropriate way, but like in a way where, my kid can come and talk to me, where I'm calling body parts what their names actually are, and not, objectifying them by these pet names or these fake names, right? So it's intentional. It takes some time and effort, and it often takes the parent having to work through their own sense of shame even about this, because they were not only were they never able to engage with it, they were shamed in a lot of cases anytime they were engaging with it. And so it does take some work there, but it's not impossible, and it can turn into this just kind of normal, natural, like this is just a part of who we are as humans and is a part of how we are in relationship to one another.
Yeah, that's really good, Laura, really good. And I love the idea of, knowing knowing thyself is, we partly have to do. And then people are not monoliths. So one young person might, in a sense, be ready, and then another young person emotionally, developmentally is not ready, and a parent knowing that. One thing my folks, even though I was raised in a Catholic home, my home was pretty secular, but my dad was an OBGYN. I know most OBGYNs now are women, and it totally makes sense, but he was of that era. But he was a good guy, and he's still alive, by the way. He's 93, but he's still alive. But so when he practiced, he was a good guy. And one of the things he and even my mother taught me, even before it was a phrase, was I understood enthusiastic consent.
Yeah.
And by the way, not just consent, because we have enough things in religious trauma that people end up consenting because of a authoritative role, which abusive. But one of the things they taught me was the idea of just it's a very human thing. Enthusiastic consent and having a full egalitarian view towards another human being.
Right.
And like I said, I was good to go until I got around evangelical youth group or Campus Crusade, the college group. Oh, man.
Yeah. Yeah. They handed you a lot of guilt.
So, Laura, obviously, you're a therapist in general, but you have an expertise and a focus on religious trauma from high control religion. So is there a coming back from it? Somebody who's experienced with your own story and then being a therapist to others, people that have experienced religious abuse, religious trauma from high control religion, how do they do? How are they doing? Is there healing? Is there hope? What are we seeing?
Yeah, I think, yes, there is healing. Yes, there is hope. I'm so grateful to be like kind of at the forefront on the front lines of being able to see this, right? Of being able to support in different ways, and then also being able to live it in my own life. And I can't say it's just this like easy 10-step process. You just do these things and then you're good to go. I mean, it can take years. If we're talking about religious trauma as complex trauma, then we know that this is not just I go to therapy for 1 year and then I'm good to go. We're talking about your entire identity. We're talking about decades usually of your life, and we're talking about what does life look like moving forward, because it's not if we get triggered, it's when. It's, hey, we're still in relationship with some of these people, or we live in certain parts of the country where it's perhaps very conservative, religious, like all of these things, right? And so it's learning how to live in a completely different way. But when you ask if it's possible, I would say yes, absolutely. And I think that's the beautiful part of all of this is that, we, as a therapist, I have, different things that I'm trained in and, can work with people that have trauma. And it's such a beautiful thing to watch them not only resolve like how that lives in their body, but then to essentially learn to live life in this really healthy way where they are interacting with themselves, with the world, with their family, with their children as entirely new people. And they really are, like creating a new generation. It is funny because whenever I worked at a church, I worked in the youth group, and I used to just, I thought, I need to go back to school to become a therapist to work with parents so that they can raise good children, like healthy children. And it's funny now because I've done a lot of different types of, therapeutic work and different specialties. I don't work with families and couples anymore, but I work with individuals. But so many times I am on the receiving end of hearing how the work that they are doing is changing their relationship with their children, whether their child is 5 or 25 or 55. And they're going, wow, like this healing work is allowing me to show up for my kid in a different way, is allowing me to show up for my partner in a different way. I'm able to, be friends with people that like I don't agree with, but we can find commonalities, and there's, robust conversation, and there's room for growth on all sides, right? And I do think that, it's not always easy. And there's always going to be days where it's going to be a struggle to keep moving forward. But I think that it's entirely possible. And, I look at complex trauma as, in a sense, like a chronic condition. Like we might look at chronic pain, chronic illness, chronic disease, right? Where we go, it may be something that we have to live with for the rest of our lives, but it doesn't have to define our lives. And when we have flare-ups, when we're triggered, when it's dicey political cycle that is intermixing religion and politics, like we make accommodations for ourselves, just like other people with other chronic conditions would make accommodations. We take care of ourselves in different ways. We attune to our basic needs, at a base level. And I think when we can reframe it a bit and look at that and to say, this isn't going to be the thing that has to define the rest of my life, but it took up a chunk of my life, and it's going to leave some marks. There's going to be some scars there, and maybe even some wounds that are really easy to reopen. But I can do that, with all of the resources that I've gained and continue to move forward. I think healing is a lifelong process, and I don't mean that you have to be in therapy for the rest of your life. But I think that every moment of every day, we have these choices where we can lean into things in a different way, where we can show up differently, where we can notice differently. And I think every single one of those moments is worth celebrating. And I think that's the actual joy of healing. And then, of course, the gift of healing is just living. And that's what we do. That's why we do this. And so I know it's possible because I'm doing it, but also because I've worked with so many fabulous people that are also doing it. And it's truly amazing to watch their journeys. Yeah.
Yes. And what's the alternative? To not deal with these things and to stay in these places where the wounds get no balm to them. And, my own word for healing, and I love the word healing, so it's... But part of my healing is awakening and having my eyes opened. Yes, at times it's been hard to see what has happened or is happening. That is absolutely sure. But it's nothing compared to when you see the newness, the hope, and then you can't unsee ever again. And there is so much joy and centering, soul centering, so much coming into ourselves when we see. And so thank you to you as a therapist, because I'm not a therapist, but as I've said, therapy has been so much a part of my spiritual healing. Yeah. And I'm the minister, and therapy's been part of that. And therapy has been so much a part of my learning to love and to accept myself and to trust myself and to become so aware of these realms that could hurt me. I mentioned this to you before we started, but Laura, your book, When Religion Hurts, is just an amazing book, and I would recommend it highly and first and foremost to anybody that has experienced high control religion, high control Christianity, and is feeling the effects of that on their mental life, their emotional life, their spiritual, soulful life. This book is an amazing book. So thank you for writing it with your expertise, but I know it's wrapped in your story, in your own story. So
thank you. Appreciate
Dr.
that.
Laura Anderson, thank you. And so, Laura, where can, obviously, people can find your book wherever fine books are sold.
Yep.
Where can people find you?
Yeah. Well, I'm on social media. My handle is at Dr. Laura E. Anderson, and that's my website, also drlauraeanderson.com. I also am in the owner, kind of CEO of a company called the Center for Trauma Resolution and Recovery. We are an online trauma coaching company, and we specialize in religious trauma. So all of the practitioners have their own experiences within high control religion and their journeys of healing. Most of them actually have mental health backgrounds academically, or have maybe even practiced as a therapist at some point in their life, but are choosing to practice instead as a coach. They've got advanced trauma training, certifications, things like that. And yeah, we're available. I mean, we actually have clients all over the world, which is unbelievable to me.
Yeah, I love that. So so I'll just pick up from that. So you obviously you're actually based in the Nashville metro area, but what you are saying is you're online, so people can do therapeutic work in this area, even being in some other city. Correct?
Yeah. I could get on a whole soapbox as to why we've chosen to do coaching over therapy, but one of the benefits to it is that we don't have the restrictions of licensure laws. We still try to abide by a very high code of ethics and, all that stuff, things that are protective in therapy. But yeah, we've chosen to do it under the coaching model, which does allow for that. So our practitioners are all over the country, and then our clients are mostly, United States, Northern America based, but really all over the world. And it really has, obviously we're seeing this need, right? And there hasn't really been, until the last few years, people that are talking about it from a clinical perspective that understands trauma. They understand how religion could potentially harm. And also that we're not vilifying religion in the grand scheme of that too, saying like, oh, you must become an atheist. That's how you heal from this. Like, that's not our position at all. Our position is you choose the path that is right for you.
Yes.
We support. Right. And so that's been just incredible to be a part of, and all of the practitioners are so freaking awesome. Like, they're just incredible. And then I have the privilege then of hearing different stories of clients and what they're doing, and both the heartbreak and harm, as well as the joy and the healing that they are living in. And it's beyond my wildest imagination of what I ever could have dreamed it was going to be, but it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's so good for people to hear a therapist say, choose your path. But I just want to echo that from the minister. Even this minister is saying,
appreciate that.
You choose your path. And
I love that.
Helpful, healing, and whatever ends up being spiritual to you. So
that's so incredible. Thank you. It's so nice to hear that from the spiritual perspective, from the the ministerial perspective, because I know that I can't imagine that all other ministers handle a statement like that well. So I can very much appreciate and respect what you're doing and the positions you're taking, because I think when we give people freedom to just show up as themselves, beautiful things happen. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Laura Anderson, thank you so much. And I know your book does and will continue, but even our time together, I know you're bringing hope and healing to folks. So thanks, Laura. Thanks for being on my podcast.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I'll come back anytime.
Absolutely. See you down the road, maybe.
Yes.
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.